So welcome to Reframing Agency. Part 1, Rights and Responsibilities in Contemporary Sex Culture. Moderated by the one and only Destiny Herndon-De Rosa with New Wave Feminists. Featuring the incredible Erika Bachiochi and Emba. Please enjoy, yes. Eat lots of food and start thinking of provocative questions. And please check out the sponsors and book tables outside. My name is Michelle Sterlace with Feminists Choosing Life of New York, co-sponsoring this event, along with the Christian Legal Society and the Guiding Star Project. I just want to give a special thank you to Anton Sorkin with Christian Legal Society and Destiny for spearheading this event. Thank you. Handing it over to Anton.
Hello, hello, hello. My name is Anton Sorkin. I am the Director for Law Student Ministries at the Christian Legal Society. I have the envious task of having to serve and sponsor and try to work through all the difficulties that law students are going to be going through in their 3 years as JDs, sometimes 4 years, sometimes if they fail, they got to do it again. I want to introduce the moderator for this event, but first of all, I want to thank someone that's been instrumental in getting this going and really planning out a lot of the details and kind of keeping track of all the small minutia that I would never be able to keep track of, which is Michelle Williams, my program coordinator. And they've really put a lot of labor and a lot of love into the small things, which I think is really important. All right, the people you're here to actually see and hear from. I want to introduce Destiny. She has been an instrumental person to show me what it's like to actually help people on the ground, not only in Texas, but also across the border in Mexico. And I'm just so honored for her to be here and to try to moderate this thing and bring her zazz to this event.
Thank you for telling us not to have children at a pro-life event. That was a really great message. Okay, so tonight we're going to hear from Erika and Christine. And quite honestly, I think when Anton and I started talking about this, I was like, you know what 2 women would be phenomenal? If we could like trick them into coming to a thing and just asking them a bunch of questions. And it was these 2 because they're both icons. And y'all can come, or do you want to eat? We waited till you got your plate to do this. Sorry, we're really rude. Anyway, so I definitely want you guys, you can sit in the middle. Yeah, that's us. And then I'll move out of the way over here. So Erika is somebody that I've probably followed for a decade now, and her writing is so super smart and academic and fancy $10 college words where you need a dictionary to read her books. And but years ago, New Wave Feminists, somebody had sent us excerpt from, what was it, Embodied Equality. And we shared it, and it immediately went viral, talking about the male normative world that we're creating, the woundless male normative world, and how that is what feminism today is trying to make all women. And I remember the truth resonated so deeply with me, and clearly thousands of people, because anytime we have shared it since then, same thing happens, and I'm like, oh, that's the tip of the iceberg in her smarty pants stuff. She actually has a ton more than that. And then over the summer, on a trip back from Mexico, I read Christine's book. I listened to it on Audible. I cheated. And if you have not read this book, it is the holy grail now for, I think, the generation of young women and what they're dealing with in dating culture and everything else. I remember we actually had a young high school intern with us at the time. And so I'm listening to, yeah, you know what I'm going to say. Do you know how many times the word sex is in your book? Have you ever done a word count?
I have not, but having to record it for Audible in front of the recording studio was an experience.
So this young high school student is just hearing the word sex every single sentence, and then me being like, yes, yes, the whole way. And I was like, this is probably not okay. Like, he's going to need therapy now. But every word of it was truth, to where I was screenshotting, like, oh, I have to share that on New Wave Feminists. I have to share that on New Wave Feminists. And it got to the point where I was like, how about y'all just read the book? Because basically I was going to share the entire book. That's how good it was. So anyway, I am so excited that we actually get to talk to you guys and pick your brains. And a lot of times, I was talking to someone earlier today, when it comes to March for Life Week, we focus a lot on abortion and obviously helping women choose life. But that's a symptom. You know, and when we get to the root, so much of it is the culture and the identity that young women have. And people growing up in this very pornified culture that just doesn't honor their human dignity. So then when they become pregnant, they don't necessarily recognize the human dignity of their unborn child. So my first question is for you, Christine. I want to know, and at some point I'm going to put this on my lapel and be a professional moderator.
That was really smart. I was actually admiring that.
Yeah, it's a new style that I'm doing, where you just don't do things correctly. What advice would you give to a 16-year-old girl right now in this culture, dealing with dating, dealing with the dynamic which you kind of lay out in your book, that we have commodified ourselves in so many ways?
Wow, that's...
Other than read your book?
Buy several copies of my book, give it to all of your friends, read it yourself. No, that's a really tough question because there's so many different forces sort of pushing on not just women, but also men in this moment, especially if you're young. I mean, there are sort of cultural pressures, there are pressures from your peers when you're 16. Also, you just kind of have a lot of feelings. Both, I guess, physical and emotional, and don't necessarily have like the guidance or even full understanding of the self to know where to go with them. I think if I had to give one piece of advice, yeah, one is so hard. I mean, if we're thinking of both sort of a secular and Christian audience, one of the things that I talk about a lot in my book actually is a sort of sense of self-knowledge, like understanding what you are looking for and where you're going and having a vision of that. And I think as a way to sort of understand the self and also protect your dignity, you have to have a sense of yourself and have some idea of what you want. So get clear on what you're actually looking for. Get clear on, if you can, like, what would a good relationship look like when you're encountering someone who could be your boyfriend or future spouse? Like, what do you actually want from them? Do you want to sort of show off and experiment, or like in the long term, do you want a partner? Do you want to be seen in a certain way? Do you want to be respected? I think generally for 16-year-olds, for anyone, the answer to these questions is yes, but it's easy to get distracted and think that you want something else. Society often tells us, especially when we're younger, that, you know, we should want something else. What, you want love? You're 16? Like, that's crazy. You should just be experimenting or doing whatever. But if you're actually clear on sort of how you value yourself and what you're really looking for in relationships, and have that kind of internal knowledge and stance, if you can develop that young, that really allows you, or at least helps you, to try and sort of chart a straight path when there's so many things pushing you from side to side in this culture. Sorry, that was kind of long, but...
No, that was excellent. Because this was also very selfish. I have teenage daughters, so that was another part of it. This was part of the setup, was just therapy. Like, I just basically need to ask you all the questions for how to raise my children. Erika, you have daughters, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, as a mother with daughters, and obviously you have been kind of seeing the culture change and shift and stuff. I have a similar question for you. Like, how do you raise daughters who, obviously, you know, being pro-life activists, we talk to them about the abortion type stuff, but now we're having to go back further and say the whole cultural thing, and the fact that when we are talking to young women who are considering abortion, that day was not the beginning of it. There was months leading up to it of just kind of this degradation of women. And so as you're raising your daughters, what's something that you pour into them so that you do raise these confident women, like Christine's saying, that know their self-worth? And
Yeah, it's a good question. So I have a 21-year-old daughter at Notre Dame. I have a 19-year-old daughter at Boston College, and I have a 17-year-old who's a senior in high school. Then I have some sons too, but we won't get into them. I also have a 4-year-old daughter. I should not forget about Charlotte, but we're not talking about sex yet. So it's a great question, and one obviously very close to my heart, because I really enjoy being a mother, much more than I thought I would. I was kind of terrified of the idea, but I really find it to be, especially teenagers. I'm not crazy about babies, even though I had a lot of them, but I some people like latch on and want to go hold the baby. That wasn't me. I liked my own babies a lot, but I love teenagers. I love teenagers because I find them so challenging. And because you can really form, like you can really work with them and ask them questions and form them. And I just find it to be really, really fun. So early on, I mean, we at around 5th grade talk to our kids, and I usually give the sex talk. Gee, I wonder why. But, and I kind of teach them just as I talk about it in sort of my public work, not like with footnotes or anything. But I talk about sexual asymmetry. And just that there are these fundamental differences between boys and girls that are deeply ingrained, that are obviously, you know the differences between boys and girls in terms of reproduction. So we sort of talk about that, but then also there are these hormonal differences that are really intense, and they're going to start to become more intense, and they're, totally normal and beautiful and make you into a woman or to a man, but they, they sort of cause really especially intense desires in men, in boys as they're developing. And girls too, but more so in boys. And so I just really talk about how how that asymmetry is just something that's really important. And so they, when they're developing friendships with boys, that it's really important for them to be, to kind of take care that they're, being respectful of those desires, and for my boys too, like so that they know. I mean, it's funny, actually, one of the lines in your book that you quoted, Christine, I just finished her wonderful book, where you talk about somebody who says, like, I don't ask boys if they use porn because everyone does. Well, my 15-year-old has pledged that he will never see a pornographic image in his life. Like, this is his goal in life, right? He has other goals too. But I think like starting it really young and starting to talk about kind of sex differences really, really young, because they already see them and they already understand, and then just talk about how beautiful they are, and then, but that there are dangers that come with them, and that, when a man, gets desirous and he can push you to do something you don't want to do, and that you're the one who carries the child. And so there's this, kind of burden, greater burden, of course, great gift too, but not when you're 16 or 17 or not married or whatever it is, on the woman, and that's just, that it's something that they should understand deeply, and not to be afraid, but it's beautiful, but it's just this big difference. And I think that hormonal difference is something we just don't take seriously. It's not that women don't like sex. Women, of course, like sex, but there's a way in which their desires are, they're slower, right? And they come through connection and through kind of deep vulnerability, and they come even to experience, like, I'm just going to say it right away, orgasm through that same thing too. And it's a slow process, where men are just, it's a much more quick desire. So I don't talk to them about orgasm when they're in 5th grade, but it's just, I just think being incredibly open and not like saying it all at once, but just getting to them before the culture does. That's actually, and I'll stop now, but my basic parenting philosophy, I mean, I like engaging with people, who have different views than me. This is like my thing, what I do all the time. But so I enjoy like putting up the best argument against the way we raise our children way ahead of time. So they've heard it from us first, and they get that it's like strong, and this is why it's strong. Now argue against that, And I also say only principles in my house, no politics. So I don't let them listen to any political podcasts until they're out of my house. But because you form yourself and you form your principles, and when you know something about the world, you can have political opinions. But anyway, that's all from me. But those are sort of some ways that I go at things.
I think that's so excellent. And yeah, I think that there's definitely that denial of science and biology a lot in this culture, because again, we're equal, but rather than calling men to come to this standard that we as females have always had, it was our equality is found in being the most base level, disgusting chauvinist guy, and we're all like, oh, we can all be addicted to porn. That's our equality. We can all have these issues, but the biology, I have found that a lot of women feel like, well, we don't want to talk about that part. We don't want to talk about testosterone or, oxytocin when we orgasm and bonding and all these things. Like, that's very purity culture, and that's something that we don't want to acknowledge. But when we do, I remember my son was 10 years old, 11 years old, starting to go through puberty, and he's this real laid-back, mellow kid, and his sister came in and was driving him crazy, because that's what little sisters do, and he grabbed her and kind of like held her for a second, and he goes, "Stop doing this." And for him to even get to that level of frustration was very unusual. And then I was like, "Let go of your sister, like move her out of the room," and he just burst into tears. And so I was like, "I'm gonna give you a minute, sit down, like chill out." But then I came back in the room later and I said, "Do you know what that was? That was like a testosterone surge, and they're gonna happen. That's not who you are. That's not your identity." Because I think a lot of young men also feel that, and then they're like, "Oh, I guess I should punch people now, and that's who I am." No, you're not. That's not your character, but it's empowering to understand your body. It's empowering for young women during pregnancy to understand that you're getting this influx of progesterone and all these other things that are gonna change your mood. So then you can kind of control that and say, it is now my job to do that. So in embodied equality, when you talk about the wombless male as the normative, and that is what we're all kind of trying to achieve in the workplace and everything else, to the deficit of our own health and wellness and well-being, that same thing's happening with sexuality right now. And what are your thoughts kind of as far as how, contraception, abortion, all of this has played into that larger conversation? Because again, as pro-lifers, we tend to focus on the end game, but what's the culture that we've created through saying, I'm like denying our fertility, basically?
Yeah. I mean, there's a long history of this, right? And that's why my book is thick and has all those footnotes. But I think, and I kind of want to just lay it out a teeny bit, because I've mentioned sexual asymmetry, that there are different ways we can respond to sexual asymmetry, right? And so women's rights activists have done this, and advocates have done this differently at different kind of eras, different stages. And so the first wave feminists did it, starting proto-feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, but then, the 19th century Americans, is they respected asymmetry, and they respected these beautiful differences between men and women, and then they sought moral and social responses to asymmetry. And so they said, hey, this sexual double standard that you guys are okay with, no. Both men and women should be called to sexual integrity, right? To understanding that sex is part of who we are. It's absolutely part of our identity. It's a beautiful thing. It's a life-giving thing. It's a beautiful sense of expression of our love and all that. But it has to be integrated, right, into the whole person, right? And so that's for both men and women, and the term is chastity, right? And that they wanted exactly, like, to call men to that high standard, right? And then come with the pill and abortion. I mean, Margaret Sanger very intentionally, with kind of the modern project writ large, which is basically a use of science and technology to sort of, govern our material, our bodily state, right? It's technology is the answer to sexual asymmetry. And so we just use technology to kind of fix women's fertility. Women's bodies are the problem. And we use tech, the pill, and other types of contraception, and then abortion as a backstop. And it changes everything. So yes, I mean, one of the things you said at the very beginning is, of course, abortion is kind of this, the response in so many ways to this bad sex culture that Christine writes so intensely and powerfully about. But it's also the precondition of it, right? It's the way in which it all kind of came about. And it's not to say that a lot didn't need to be changed before, the 1970s, 1960s when the pill came about. Certainly, I mean, there's a lot of repression of the understanding of like women having sexual desires and all sorts of things like that. But to fix women's fertility and say that that's the way, and therefore to kind of unleash like male sexuality, instead of saying like, what about we took slow sex and the way that women enjoy sex and allowed men to conform themselves to that, which would make a lot more sense because women have the more complex bodies, right? So we had that to some extent. We just didn't have the science there, and then now we have the science, but we don't have the sort of philosophy anymore. So I think it's hard. I mean, there's all sorts of other reasons to question abortion and things like that. But I think in terms of it being a backstop for the sexual risk taking that is just part and parcel of everything we do, that is incredibly male normative for all the reasons we've said, it's just kind of a disaster. But It's hard to question the whole thing. But to me, it's one of the best arguments for pro-life feminism is to just say, like, look, this has enabled us to sort of, imitate the worst possible sort of man in sex, in the workplace, not the work, but like imitate that womanless man in the workplace, and not have any accommodations for who we are as women,
Yeah.
I mean, kind of imitate the worst kind of man in the workplace, too. Actually, we see that very frequently.
Yeah, right.
Sam Bankman-Fried's apprentice/assistant was just a woman who lied in the same way that he did. But that's another topic that I'm thinking about. But actually, to piggyback on this question, I think maybe actually the background to the advice that I would give a 16-year-old about knowing oneself is to be honest, actually, and that's a huge part of it, right? Like, as a young woman, be honest about what you feel and who you are. There's, in many cases, I feel like pressure. I have a 23-year-old sister also, so in some ways, like, in writing my book, I was thinking about her. She was, like, in college as I was writing it. I mean, like, pressure for young women to go along with things because that's what, they're told. They're told that, of course, they should like having casual sex like guys do. That's natural. Like, be honest with yourself. You're female and you probably aren't experiencing this in the same way. You shouldn't fake pleasure to please some guy or to please, the norms of a sexual culture that says that you should act like a boy to be accepted or act like someone who isn't you. Be honest with yourself when you think about, like, oh, hey, actually, I would maybe like to get married or have kids at some point in the future or near future. Don't pretend that that's something that you don't want and then, act in opposition to yourself. And yeah, I think actually, like what you were saying, Destiny, sorry, I'm just not functioning well with this microphone.
You're doing great.
There is this pressure, I think, that comes with a contraceptive mentality, with all of the sort of scientific advances, or at least discoveries that have been made, to almost take what seems like the easy way out, or what both women and men are told is the easy way out, right? Which is to focus on the self, to be an individual, to sort of cut off any relationship or even bodily function that would make you potentially dependent on someone else or not in total control of your life. Whether that's contraception, whether that's medication that changes your mood or makes you more productive. There are subtle pushes in these directions, and many of them do involve a sort of flattening of the human person to the default, which does tend to be male. And that's really unfortunate, but I think we are all caught up in that in various different ways, whether it's sex or anything else.
One thing, too, that I find so frustrating about this is that, so, like, your book is just this, you really do want to, like, give it to every single, teenage college student, but probably college student, not teenager. I don't know, you have to think about the age. But one of the frustrations is because because contraception and abortion are so widely available, obviously abortion less so now in certain places, but that it makes the person, the woman, and potentially the man too, but the woman who, read your book and is like, yes, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna think about, and I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna think about what I want and all that. And what you realize is, like, then the men are like, there's like 20 women out there who are willing to, whatever the swiping thing is, like, go crazy with me. Correct, yeah. And you have no power to do that because the default is now yes, right? And so because contraception and abortion have put the default on yes, then any woman who says no, like, I'm not going for that, I'm waiting, I'm not, you have these great, and then the guys are just, it's like, you kind of have to use the economic language, but, like, the market is set up totally against this lone wolf over here. And that's why you kind of need more than, you could, unless you had, like, a revolution. Hey, I'm working on it. We're all working on it, right? But if you had a revolution, you had women really, like, wake up and go, like, okay, and everybody, like, a good, like, you've got to have a majority. You've got to have a lot, right? You've got to have a lot of women work together toward this. Otherwise, you need some other way to change norms, right? and because you just don't have the power, an individual doesn't have the power to do that, right? So it's very, very tricky.
I'm pretty sure Andrea Dworkin proposed this in the 70s, that we just all go on sex strike until we can, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll call my husband, I'll let him know. It's happening.
Well, that's different, right? You're in a, I mean, but like for
You know
single
what?
women,
Just
it's
for
like,
solidarity, I feel
Yeah.
like I should join you guys.
yeah.
I feel like I should do that. Christine, in your book, you know, you're taking on patriarchy, and I feel like you cut through all the BS and like put it so clearly, and these were the stages and the waves, and this is where we kind of lost course and actually became co-opted by patriarchy. When you have Hugh Hefner, you know, basically helping with things, I said to somebody earlier today, when you know, your Free the Nipple rally is drawing the same crowd that a wet t-shirt contest would draw, then you're probably not doing feminism right. But that's like what we're doing, right? And so I feel like a lot of us feel insane because we're in this feminist movement and we're like, I feel like half the guys on Jersey Shore would support your version of feminism right now. And maybe it's patriarchy, I don't know. But you take that on, and I feel like you lay it out very clearly in your book. And there's always going to be the pick-me type people. Like, have you gotten a lot of backlash from, because it's almost like an industry level type thing, but I feel like the women reading it have to see it and say, thank you for saying something. Like, thank you for giving us the words for it. Like, what's been the response?
That is a really interesting question. I mean, the thing is, in talking to the women and the men I interviewed for my book, actually, if you sort of push people through kind of the logical contours of their decision-making and questioning, like, many of them kind of realize this or sense it already. You know, when you ask them, okay, well, like, why are you doing this thing? Who is benefiting from this? Seems like it's not you, judging from how miserable you are. Where did the pressure to do this come from? You know, people begin to realize, and the women realize that they're not really having that much fun. And many of the guys also realize that they're, in fact, not having as much fun as would be advertised. That said, I do think that, actually, exactly as you were saying, Erika, it is sort of a cultural pressure. It's hard to not do the thing that everyone else is doing. It's hard to sort of stand out. And I also feel like there is, in some ways, a kind of top-down cultural pressure that is actually top-down, and it is sort of like kind of capitalist and Hollywoodist and extremely, I don't want to describe it as extremely liberal, but often the most libertine voices tend to be the loudest and cause the most ruckus and get the most attention because sex sells and people like to talk about it. And we do have this sort of American idea of freedom that I criticize in my book that suggests that, like, the best way of life, what is good in life, is to do whatever you want whenever you want it. And that's what freedom looks like, to fulfill every possible pleasure you could want, which does not fulfill most people, but it certainly looks good on a screen. You know, it's easy to write articles about. And so people feel like they have to live up to that. And so, I mean, there are women who don't want to free the nipple or who would, you know, rather not be participating in, you know, extremely sexualized cultures who feel like they should in order to be like a good modern person because, like, I'm an American, I'm a woman, I'm a feminist, so I should be acting free. And this is what we've said freedom looks like, I guess. So I guess this is what I'm going to be doing, even though I'm not really enjoying it. And I mean, even many men I talk to who, you know, would tell me, like, yeah, I think I'd actually like to be in a relationship. Like, I want to date someone, but I'm a guy. I should be out there, like, hooking up with girls and, like, going on multiple dates because that's what guys do. That's what I've been told that being a man is. So I guess I'll just do that. And also our culture has lost a lot of the language that we used to have for talking about real desire and really understanding what our true sort of natural feelings and longings are. there's like a conversation that I had with a therapist that I relay in the book that I found so fascinating. We were talking about like the sort of guy who kind of goes out and hooks up with lots of women, like, you know, meets people on apps and sleeps with them. And she was saying she has a number of clients like this, and when she asks them why they do this, eventually they realize that like it's not really that they want to have sex with all these women. They actually like really like sleeping next to someone and like waking up with someone and intimacy and sort of closeness. And that's what they're looking for, but there's not really a language to say like, hey, I just really want a close, intimate relationship with you. They have to say, well, like, let's have sex. That's the language that they have for it. And that's not necessarily their idea, but it is what we've been told for so often, for decades at this point, that it's almost become the only understanding that we have.
When it comes to language, you had a chapter in your book that I thought was a story in your book that was really heartbreaking about how language has been used to manipulate, right? Where now if a woman says, please don't choke me, because that's become so normalized in pornography. And one of the stats you had was something like people interviewed from like 13 to 17, very, very young. But because we have smartphones and devices in kids' hands, by the time they're 9, 10 years old, they're being exposed to very hardcore pornography and this just degrading violence against women. It's normalized. And so young women, when they're saying, or even older women, you were talking about older women in your book saying, I really don't want to be choked, but when I say I don't want to, that's considered kink shaming. And so that's the problem, is I'm actually kink shaming somebody because I don't want violence used on me in the bedroom. That maybe haunted me for like probably till now. I'm still haunted by it. But that's the reality, and it is this. I didn't ask Anton if I could use this word. I'm going to use the word P, but it means something else, and y'all know what it means, like the hats that they wore at the march, right? But you have, I feel like you have a feminist movement, and then you have the P power movement, which is very much like the sexual revolution. I'm going to rule the world by what's between my legs, that type of mentality. And when y'all are talking about that, I think porn culture has fed into that so much, because it's not even, there's 20 other people I can swipe on. I can just go look at porn. I can go do whatever. Like, you are very expendable. There's this great quote from, and here's the thing, I talk at colleges and I'm agnostic, I'm secular, and so I always say there's this great quote by a brilliant person, but some of y'all are going to know who it is, and it's that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, it's that it shows too little. Does anybody know who said that? Yeah, it was one of y'all's popes. But I never tell anybody that. But I think that's brilliant, because like you were saying, like people are craving that intimacy deep down, and yet we live in such an instant gratification culture that it's like they don't even know you can get there, that you can get to that point of truly desiring the best for the other person and finding love. And you even showed that in your book, that it's like, could we at least have that for a night? Could we do that for a night? And that was so heartbreaking, that that's kind of where we're at, that people want to expedite everything. And then to your point earlier, just about the biology of women, you know, it's the old trope that women are ovens and men are microwaves, right? And that it takes longer. You've never heard that?
Really?
Did I invent that?
No, I've definitely heard that.
It's definitely a thing. You guys just don't know. It's definitely a thing. And so when women are ovens, it's going to take longer. They need to feel secure. They need to feel safe in order for their bodies to allow them to experience that level of pleasure. And they know they're not going to get that in this hookup culture. Then they say, okay, what can I get out of that exchange? Power, right? And that's the P-power type movement, is I can control you with this. Even though I'm not going to get any type of pleasure, and I might end up the one pregnant or contracepting or doing all these other things, that taking Plan B and throwing my whole system out of whack all the time, which has kind of become the norm. It's horrifying for what it does to women's health. But it does seem like women are waking up, you know, with the books like How to Date Men When You Hate Men. Like, women are unhappy. This isn't panning out. This feminist promise that this was going to be so liberating, because nobody will acknowledge just the difference. And it's a very general statement, and I'm not saying that all natal females and natal males are one particular way. But basically, a lot of us are being told that we have to act in this male-normative world, from sex to abortion to all these other things, and can have no emotional response to it. And it sounds like even men want that emotional response to it too. So my next question, since I asked you about what you would say to a 16-year-old girl, what would you say to a 16-year-old boy? Like, how do you have that same type of conversation with them?
I just say stay the hell away from porn. I mean, literally, it's that easy.
Just porn?
Yeah. I mean, I just think porn is just so devastating to boys at this point. There's not like a, I don't know if some of you probably know Richard Reeves in this town, but I had a like knockout, drag out fight with Richard Reeves on pornography. Not really, but like I mean, I just think it's so devastating. And I've actually talked to some men like about why nothing's really been done. I mean, it's the First Amendment. It's like you point out, it's not speech. Give me a break, right? Shouldn't be protected, etc. But I think so many people are implicated. Like so many powerful men who have the ability, or legislators or something, to do something, like among, on the right even or whatever, who would be like, we don't like porn, are like themselves somehow, don't want it to go away. And I just think it is just, I personally think it's just bad through and through. There's no nuance. There's no like nice porn. Like, I just think it's bad and has to.
But there's feminists.
Yeah.
I mean, there are
Yeah.
feminists who will argue with you about
Yeah.
this, that sex work is work and pornography
right.
is liberating
Yeah.
to women. And I think anytime you are literally purchasing someone's
Yeah.
body,
Yeah.
where if they, they still have their mind and their heart, and so they might be able to think things, but the second those words
Yeah.
come out of their mouth, like, please get off me, you're disgusting, you're going to get punched in the face or killed or something, then your body has been purchased. You became an object in that moment. And it's so bizarre to me that we have this Me Too movement and we're saying, in the workforce,
Right.
you can't treat a woman like that, and we're going to call this sex work, but the same rules don't apply when it comes to that. And we see that in pornography all the time, that women are abused, and you can tell they're unhappy. Gail Dines actually talks about this a lot in her book on porn culture, that it's creating this toxic stew with young men because you're still seeing naked people having sex, and so it is going to biologically arouse you, but you're also seeing extra mascara being put on the woman so that she's choking and her makeup's running, and you see her face contorted and she's in pain. So you're sending mixed messages to your body that this is pleasurable,
Right.
even though I should feel bad for this person, I should feel shame for it.
It's a mess.
And then we talk about rape culture, and it's,
Right.
if that's the theory, this is the practice. I mean, it's right here in front of us that we have allowed that, and it is absolutely insidious. It does seem like more young men are waking up to it and being like, this is empty and counterfeit, and it does teach them how to treat others just as objects.
It's interesting, actually, throwing it back a little bit to what you were saying about power, and how, if women can expect to receive pleasure from this sort of sex, and like they look for what power they can get from it. And one of the things I found both sort of fascinating and alarming and saddening is the sort of mainstreaming and like celebration of like sugar baby and sugar daddy culture recently. And it's just like, oh, you're young and hot, so why don't you like trade that to some guy to get fancy purses and get an allowance? And that is sex work, but the fact that this is celebrated in so many spaces now is like, this is a good road to go down. This is just like something that any young woman should take advantage of. Pay for your law degree. Seems totally crazy to me. And I think this is actually also one of the main disagreements that I have with Richard Reeves, actually, because it's like, I find his work really interesting, but we also got into tips.
Can we get in here so y'all can fight him?
Sorry, I love Richard Reeves, but I just, on this point, I'm just
delight.
like,
Yeah, when he was like, actually, like, I think that sex work should be legal, I was like, pardon? But I think there's something that's really kind of mixed together in the celebration of, or at least tolerance for, sex work that has a lot to do with kind of broader power relations and economic relationships in our culture, right? In many places, like, the only way that you can have power is to have income, is to get money somehow from somewhere. And the justification that many feminists make for why sex work is work and we should legalize sex work is that, like, women are poor. They need money. We force people or ask people to do other degrading jobs for money, so why shouldn't this be one too? And so the pushback there, it's hard to say, well, you just shouldn't do that. Like, you should find another bad job. We actually have to develop a language and a society that suggests that there are other options for women, that this shouldn't be sort of the last resort or the only resort. Like, we should have actually social safety nets and policies in place that make this not something that you would turn to so quickly. That make, getting an education not dependent on like sleeping with an older rich man so that he'll pay for it, because otherwise you would never be able to go to college. Like, there's a much larger system of value implicated in this. And I feel like that isn't talked about enough. And similarly with pornography, as you say, there's so many people involved because pornography is incredibly lucrative, right? Like, people make a lot of money off of this. Producers especially, and men especially, frankly. And until that becomes not as possible, until sort of the pushback against porn, I think the prohibitions against making it, the ease of selling it and supplying it, until that is sort of turned down, of course people are still going to produce it because they get money and they can say that this is freedom, this is speech.
This is America.
Why would you take this away from me?
Yeah, I think it's something that it also, because it's kind of done in secret, and so who knows, but like you're saying, the fact that would these people be making this choice if they had other more equitable choices? And that also, I feel like, is the kind of argument we use all the time when it comes to abortion, right? Like, is it truly, and I would say that's actually why we have a lot of pro-choice people that work with us, because we point that out, that it's not a choice when you feel like it is your only option, because all of these other systemic, like, oppressive things are at play that make this really undesirable thing that nobody wants the only option at the end of the day. And I see so many overlaps between the kind of mouthpieces for abortion and pornography. You have this upper echelon, this like top 2% that truly it is a choice. They could be doing something different, but for them, they either want an abortion or they want to do pornography. And so they're the ones, of course, put in front of the cameras all the time to promote it, and this is a choice, and this is liberating, and it's wonderful. But below that, that's the tip of the iceberg. Below it is people who it is coercion, exploitation, all of these other hard things, and nobody's ever listening to their stories. So I think maybe a part of actually fighting the porn culture is putting those stories out there, humanizing those people, showing more than these things, because I think in this culture right now, between revenge porn and things like on Pornhub, that the legality of that, it can be shut down because they have minors on these sites. And I mean, the horrifying just things that so many young people are having to put up with. And thankfully, I feel like they are getting platformed now and people are actually talking about it, that it goes even beyond just your morality. These are illegal things that should not be happening in a civilized society. But when that much money is being made, it's not shut down. So, agreed, nobody watch porn ever. It's disgusting. It's horrifying. Listen to the voices of women who have had to participate in that, and men. It's degrading for everybody. It's the equal degrading thing. Young men, have you had young men read? And I will say, yes, it's definitely probably a college age book, but I talk to my kids about everything and have my whole life. So I actually told I'm just going to say teenage daughter, so y'all don't judge me too hard, that I would give her $50 if she read your book and wrote me an essay on each chapter, because that's how good I think it is. I'm like, here's the thing, I'm sorry, but you're watching TikTok. You're hearing way worse than the stuff in this book, probably, because I don't shelter as much as I should. I'm definitely a prepare my child for the road, not the road for my child type parent. And everything in that book, I think, is going to prepare her for what this future looks like. But at the same time, I have 2 sons and 2 daughters. So you want to grab the boys by the shoulders too and be like, do you understand the damage you're doing? Would you say that was kind of your answer earlier, right? That just allow them, get past the toxic masculinity and allow them to feel and have desires and wants that are true intimacy and emotions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important for men and for young men in particular, for us to make space for that, for their parents, for their friends, for ideally, although maybe this is not happening in the moment, for society at large to make space for a different kind of masculinity than the type that's often presented in our culture. I mean, I think I've gone to colleges and spoken about the book and talked to college students and sometimes younger who have read it. And first of all, often the guys, the young men are like, oh, I didn't know that about women. Like, I didn't realize that women felt that way about the culture. And so actually just talking with them about that, just being honest about how girls experience things, how women are experiencing things differently than what you would imagine or what you have thought of. Perhaps you've never even thought of it as a young man because, again, our culture doesn't really ask them to take the woman's perspective. I think that would be really important for a teenager. So yeah, I mean, I would recommend it for young men as well. Let's see, what other advice would I give a 16-year-old boy? Gosh, staying away from porn is a good one. I actually, I was going to say make more female friends, but actually making more male friends. But not just like your peers, but trying to find like mentors, like older men, whether it's your dad, uncles, like a teacher who you think is really cool, who can be examples for you, who you can learn things from rather than picking it up on TikTok or by like watching Rick and Morty or something. But actually trying to find ways to sort of grow as a man with good examples. And that actually takes work. I think a number of the young men I've talked to have mentioned how like it kind of seems like women, perhaps because it's taken so much longer for women to be as respected in society, perhaps because of the push towards female equality more recently, there are programs set up for women, right? There's STEM for women, like there are scholarships for women. You can kind of find mentors more easily. But a lot of young men sort of feel like they don't know where to go or who they can talk to, or even if they should talk to anyone. So actually finding someone who you can look up to, I think that's actually really important for young boys in this moment. But it has to be a good person.
Yeah, we don't need more of the... So as I was reading your book, it's interesting because I grew up evangelical. I'm agnostic now, but there was so much purity culture, and I literally had to take my virginity ring off because I got so bloated from being pregnant at 16. Cool story about me. But my family was like, you can just pray again and it regrows your hymen or something. I was like, okay, I'll try, but the baby's gonna come. Anyway, so purity culture didn't work out for me, and I know it doesn't work out for a lot of women, but at the same time, it's kind of this thing where we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater with some of it, right? So if you say anything that seems even slightly puritanical, like, let's respect ourselves and each other, then it's like, oh, that's purity culture, that's what you're pushing on one another. I will never forget that there was this, do you know who Rob Bell is? He has a movie called The Heretic. I like him, he was a heretic. Anyway, he used to do these Pneuma videos, and he had one where he talked all about how fire can be life-giving. It can like save your life. And so he's talking about a fire in a fireplace literally saves you. But a fire, outside of a fireplace can burn the whole place down. It can lead to death and destruction. And in a very purity culture way, he kind of compares sex to it. So like sex within the fireplace, AKA marriage, that's when it's best, but otherwise it's a bonfire and you're gonna die if you have sex. And I was like, yeah, that's what's gonna happen. We've I feel like because of the deconstruction and the backlash against purity culture, at least amongst my peers, so people in their 30s, I'm seeing a lot of trying to rewrite societal norms, and your book talks a lot about that. And Erika, I'd be interested if you kind of noticed this too, that there's church talk about sex, and sex needs to be within marriage and all of that. Is there a way, though, if there are young people who are not going to adhere to that, for us to at least have societal standards that are talk to one another? I know that, for instance, I had a conversation with my high school boyfriend and said, if I ever get pregnant, I will not have an abortion. We will be parents. And I remember I asked him, what would you do? And he said, I don't know. And so when he and I broke up right after I got pregnant, there was a part of me that couldn't blame him because we actually had a conversation beforehand. The problem with hookup culture is we don't have those conversations. We don't set those limits of like what the expectations are now. And so the fires are just running rampant everywhere. And I don't want Rob Bell to be right about that, you guys, because it was so purity culture like circa 2005. Is there a way to create just a respectful society at this point where it's not, for even secular people outside of the church, where we say, like, here's kind of the standards we should play by that respect everybody's involvement in the relationship?
And actually, I'm just going to piggyback on this question for Erika. Just really putting you on the spot here. But one of the things that I loved about your book was that it actually has such a strong focus on not just sort of females defending their own chastity and virtue and making that a woman's problem, but that men have to be responsible too. And this is like a huge component of it that actually does not seem to get talked about as much, and I think is part of the reason why so many people push back against purity culture, because it's seen as woman shaming and like men still get to do whatever they want. But how do you make arguments for sort of virtue and values, and I mean, maybe this is actually especially important for this group, in an ostensibly pluralistic society, right? Because so many of these arguments are based on an understanding of virtue, an understanding of like, this is a good way to live one's life. That's in many cases based on a Christian understanding of what is valuable and what is good, either explicitly or not explicitly. How do you make that argument to someone, who isn't religious, who's secular, who is not familiar with all of these arguments?
Well, first I would say I don't really know what purity culture is, because I didn't live anything like purity culture, and I don't know.
Congrats, obviously.
Very different upbringing, and very different. My own experience is very, very different from that, far afield. So what I find really interesting about it is the people who have been interacting with the book are very much secular, pro-choice, legal scholars, people who don't seem, at least as far as I can tell, bothered by the kind of vision that Wollstonecraft puts out, right? Because it's not, I mean, obviously later in the book, I talk more about my vision, but it's really at the beginning of the book where it's Wollstonecraft's vision, right? And I think that, I try to use virtue interchangeably with intellectual and moral excellence. And I think we know a lot about excellence in our culture. I mean, we talk a lot about excellence. So we have kind of understandings of what it is to be kind of an excellent athlete or an excellent scientist or an excellent musician. And we also know that it takes self-discipline to get to those things, right? To be excellent, that they're practices, right? And that we need people to guide us who already are excellent in that field or that discipline, right? And we don't just sort of, one of my sons just thinks he's like supposed to just sprout up and be like an excellent soccer player. And it's like, no, you have to like go outside in the backyard and like spend a lot of time. You're not just Pele. Like, do you guys know who Pele is? Yeah, okay. Just making sure. I know he's like a long time ago. Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Wow.
Way to go, Erika. What
Yeah. No, I mean, she's inspired thought, right? But I think that there's just so many ways in which we talk about, we just don't use the term virtue, but we're talking about aiming at perfections in all sorts of ways and all sorts of different disciplines, right? And that's all that virtue is it's the perfection of the human being, right? And so you have to kind of think about the nature of the human being and all that. But we aim at the like what's the perfection of a knife? I mean, or the perfection of a chef, or excellence of like you kind of know when you taste something delicious, like this is excellent, and why is it excellent? And it's aiming at something that is perfecting kind of the nature of the thing, right? So I think that obviously, maybe I wouldn't go into all of that, but I think we know kind of excellence when we see it. And so it's, the question is sort of like, why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't we want to think about that for our relationships? So like, and for how we treat one another. Like, why wouldn't there be that same sense of being an excellent friend or an excellent spouse or an excellent lover or an excellent parent or whatever it is? I mean, obviously we're flawed, so like we fail all the time, but the point that we're aiming at something, and there's some way in which there's a good to which we are going. and moving. And I just think this is like Aristotle's insight, right? That we're always aiming toward a good, and sometimes we're a bit confused and we can't quite see it right, partly because of the cultures confusing us and all that, but we're always aiming at that. And so I think that's what you did in your interview techniques, right? Is like you're drawing out from them, like, what is it that the good that you, and some of the quotes, you're like, oh, they just nailed that, like just in a sense of what they wanted. Like one of them was, I think it's just human nature to love and be loved. And it's like, drop the mic, like that's it, So I think that's where, the book is a history, and so I'm going to use Wollstonecraft's language, which is the language of virtue, and I think it's really beautiful language, but it's something that we all know something about, unless we're like slobs and like but even, everybody has some way in which they're aiming at something, and so I guess that's the way I would put it.
Yeah, I mean, in my book, as Erika was pointing out, I am criticized by some, reviewers further to the right for not being super explicit and like, why don't you just tell them to sort of like be a Christian and get married and stop having sex before marriage? And yeah, that doesn't necessarily appeal to people who are not brought up in that tradition. But I do think that that many people have a sense of like, yeah, what is good, what they want from relationships, frankly, how they would like to be treated. And you can also just talk about like treating other people in the way that you'd like to be treated, this sort of very basic message that hopefully most of us have heard at some point in our lives. Because, I do think that there is, in some sense, a natural sense that is, often confused and can be hidden by our culture. But yeah, people want to be loved. People, if you ask them, want to be cared for. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes some trial and error to figure out that is actually what you want. But eventually, sort of, most people get down to that, and encouraging that conversation and realization earlier would be incredibly helpful. And even just speaking in those terms as to what we want, what most people want, what we sort of owe to each other, and the responsibilities that we have to each other, just as humans with inherent dignity, regardless of religion or backdrop. I think that can resonate with people. But I mean, one of the things that I think is really important and is also kind of missing in our society, and this is sort of a public policy question in some ways, that also at the bottom of all of this, these are values, right? Like seeing the other person as a person with inherent dignity, the idea that we are responsible for each other, that we have debts to each other in society, like those are values. And they have to be taught. And we don't really have sort of a system in which it's almost okay to teach or sort of privilege certain values above others at this moment. Because we do, in fact, live in a pluralistic society. And so one of the questions that I'm always grappling with, and continue to grapple with, especially in the context of sort of sex and family and what we owe to each other, is like, how do we teach that? Like, how do you begin to inculcate that early so that you can practice these values and practice these virtues and be able to talk about them and pull them out when it really matters? And I don't know that we have a policy solution for that yet.
I mean, again, I think that a lot of it is thinking about, and you said this earlier, and I think it's a really good insight, is what are we aiming at? And so what is like your vision of what you would like? Like, do you know any couples, or, if you're thinking about relationships, do you have any couples who you really see have there's something about their relationship? And then how do you think you would get there? And you think about, like, if I want to be a superstar, again, I'm just going to use soccer because that's what I played. But like, what that player looks like, and they're way out there and they're very different from where I am. And like, you can't like wake up one day and just do that. Right? So you've got to train, and there's like all sorts of discipline that goes into it, and you've got to find the right teachers. And so it's almost like, not like you plan out your, I'm going to have this great marriage or this great relationship, and but like what you're aiming at, I think, is finding what you're aiming at, thinking about what you're aiming at, and then like thinking about what it would take and the kind of person you would need to be in a relationship where you would be like the person you want to you respect that you want to be with would respect you and want to be with you. Like, you want to be that person instead of like, I gotta go, like, who's that person that I want to become, who can be generous, who thinks of others, and all that. And I think that's hard for a kid to imagine, but I think when it's sort of built in my family because there's so many children, but is that you're always owing to someone else constantly. Like, it's constantly, in some sense, it's hard for you to kind of just think about yourself, right? Because there's just others to whom you have smaller, when you're little, like, obligations of not taking their toys and learning how to kind of master your desire to steal from someone, or with food. I mean, Wollstonecraft was really big on like food and drink, that like you learn that beautiful gift of chastity that you then give to your spouse at some point is learned in these like small acts of self-mastery as a child. But you can't just, you wake up wanting to have like 3 bowls of cereal, and when the cake comes out, you want 3 pieces. Like, someone has to teach you that, right? But you don't learn self-mastery on your own. You have to be taught that. And that's what parents do. And that's why, again, I'm going to bring Wollstonecraft up, and that's why you got to read the book. It's not about me, it's about her. But but just the sense of how important parenting is, and just the great dignity of being a mother or father. And so to me, one of the things that grieved me most, I was telling Christine before we sat down, how kind of heartbroken I was in reading some of the stories, because I grew up, mom and dad divorced when I was 4, mom remarried and divorced 2 other times, started drinking when I was 13, acting out, blah, blah, like, it was crazy town. And I don't know, I was just so, and it took a long time of healing to like get to the point where I can be happily married and have family life and all that. And it's like, to know that this is like the culture we've set up, so there's just like me, everyone is in this position, and how painful that was for me, and it just grieves me so much. And so to think of like that there are people out there who don't get the path that I got just through, I don't know, like just happenstance and grace and all sorts of other things, and so miss out on having children because they're deathly afraid of children. They're afraid of like being pregnant. They're afraid of, and that the whole thing, like, it just grieves me so deeply to think of this is like this is like the inheritance we've given people. Like, we've just, so anyway, I
think that's the scary thing, because when we talk about, find that couple or these people you want to aspire to be, and
where are they?
we want, Andrew Tate. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what those boys, and thank God he got arrested, because he was making it look really good
Yeah,
for a really long
yeah.
time. And they're like, I want cars, I want all
Yeah.
this stuff, and if I treat women terrible and I'm awful, then, but we have so many young men especially who are following that, and then we have young girls who are like, oh, the Kardashians, like, it's all about my body, yada, yada, and material possessions and all of this. And they don't see the real part, right? Because just like social media, they see the highlight reel, they see the fun stuff people are sharing, but there's a lot of brokenness and a lot of these celebrities they're looking up to. And so, where are the people who are virtuous and ethical and have integrity and have wonderful lives that are great? And they also probably have humility, so they're not posting it all over the internet like we are. So I don't know.
No.
And I think it's scary because it does leave young people, especially in this place of trial and error. And I know, because I had a child so young, after that, anybody that I went out with, it was kind of like I was already at a disadvantage because I had a kid. So it's like, well, we know that you're not a virgin, and so what's going to happen next? And I ended up, getting this kind of high body count and just being like, feeling like I had to give that to compensate for the fact that I wasn't like all the other girls, and I had a curfew and I had responsibilities. But in my head, I would always tell myself, like, I'm reading Cosmo magazines that I'm sneaking, and it's 20 pages of glossy images of women you're never going to look like, that they don't even look like them. It's all this crap you can buy to look like them, just reiterating how you're not enough, not enough, not enough. And then 20 pages of like, here's sex tips and tricks so that you can get somebody to love you, because your teeth aren't wide enough, your hair's not shiny enough, your butt's not big enough or too big, depending on whatever decade we're in at the time, and breaks us down so much, but okay, well, my getting someone to desire me, that is my sexual work. And then I have to be like a man, or I have to be like what I think these other magical women are who can just sleep around, and as long as he doesn't call me back before I don't call him back, it's fine. And then all of a sudden, years go by, you get married, and like, first of all, I don't cook, but like one time I cooked, my husband was like, this chicken's kind of dry, and I was like, go to hell. Like, I loved it. I had this like piled up years of rejection from the person not calling me back, even though I didn't call him back, because I'm a liberated, like, cool feminist who could just do this stuff. And that's denying ourselves. And so I think it's really beautiful when you're talking about it. Yeah, like, know yourself, be honest with yourself, find friends to have that safe space, to have the real conversations. And I do think young women are starting to find that space, because it's like, oh, you feel rejected too, you feel commodified too. Like, so much of your book, when you talk about how we've made ourselves products on these sites, and it's just very capitalistic and instant gratification, how we've completely removed ourselves from community, so there's no accountability, so people can send a picture of their peen and they don't care, because who do you know that they know? You're not going to even be able to tattle on them, because it's no longer this community space where there used to be this accountability and this expectation for how we live. It's all just commodifying. Both books are amazing. That one's the one you should read if you have a dictionary nearby. And then Christine is phenomenal. I think we have time for a Q&A. Actually, I was supposed to bring my phone up so that I knew that, but I didn't do any of that today. So yeah, we've got like 20 minutes. Does anybody have any good burning questions that I'm definitely going to repeat into the microphone, because I was told to do that and not forget? Yes, I'm going to do mic one. Yes, what is your question?
Thank you so much. This is really fascinating. My question is about the sex reception and numbers, especially among young people. How can we kind of use this maybe as an opportunity to talk about these issues? And how does this maybe, I thought about it, just thinking in my own life is related to divorce culture and also fears of intimacy as young people, because they've seen things go so wrong with their own parents, especially. So yeah, how do we address, if it, I think for people it might be different ways.
So how do we address the sex recession that has come from people seeing divorce and trauma and unhappy marriages and all of that?
Wherever it comes from, how do we kind of use it as an opportunity?
Is an opportunity to infuse some of the truth from these two books in it.
Yeah, I want to let Christine mainly take this question, but I would just add to it just that I think porn, I mean, if I were a little kid and I saw porn, like, because it's everywhere, like, I'd stay clear away from sex too, right? Like, get away from me, I'm a lesbian, or I'm a whatever, like, I don't want any man near me because this is what men do to women, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Or like, I'm not even a girl because this is crazy how boys look at girls, or boys treat girls that way. Like, why would I ever want to be a boy? Because that's how boys, I mean, I think all of that, like, I think porn is just, I'm not, that's my guess of some of what's going on.
Yeah, the falling amounts of sex, especially among young people. A lot of conversation about this and like some confusion about the causes. And I think they are multifaceted. I mean, yeah, like sort of porn culture, if you're a kid watching that, like, of course, that couldn't be me. Like, I don't want any part of that. It looks terrible. But also I think the worrying thing about it is not even necessarily that young people are having like less sex, but what that says about relationships and relating to other people. Like, in some ways, the shorthand for like not having as much sex, that's shorthand for like they're not going out and meeting people. They don't make friends. They don't leave their houses. They stay online and have sort of like fake quasi-digital relationships without meeting in person. And I think that does give us an opportunity perhaps to sort of model what a good relationship would look like, to suggest that actually, intimacy can be beautiful, that this is something that people would want, and like here are ways that it can be good, not scary, not something that you have to trade yourself for. Like, okay, we're moving away from, or we're maybe lessening sort of the amount of random hooking up. That could give us time to put something different in place, something stronger. Actually sort of try and begin to build the bedrocks of just, how do you talk to another person? Like what, what do relationships feel like? You are lonely, say, you're at home, like you aren't having sex because you don't have any friends and you don't know how to get a boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, what are the skills that we need to develop to relate to each other well? Which means not just like, how do you flirt online, but like, how do you treat other people? What does being treated well look like? How do you seek out that instead of this other thing that you clearly don't find attractive or appealing? I think it's an opportunity to model good relationships if we see them, and to begin to valorize intimacy and care of the sort that people are recognizing that they haven't seen, and so are pulling back from the whole thing altogether. But again, I think it's sort of a concerted effort will be needed. I don't know, is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Well, the Dobbs case, as we know, permits the prohibition of abortion. We're all here attending the March for Life. I would like both panelists to address the question, what can we hope for from the prohibition of abortion, wherever it takes place, in terms of making men more responsible, making them more patient and understanding of women want to go slow? Because without the availability of abortion, they can't always just immediately get someone else at no cost. So what can we hope for, and what are the limits of what we can hope for in terms of impact on these deep issues that you guys are talking about?
I mean, we've already seen people addressing that, like right after even the leak came out, where people were saying, okay, that's it, I'm going to go get a vasectomy. And it's like, oh, thanks for being responsible now. Like, but you're right. Like that is something where suddenly people are saying, okay, if I do not have this access. And then I would argue the other part is people scrambling to FDA-approved abortion pills and things like that because, oh, sorry, you got so used to having this as a quote-unquote safety net that we're going to do everything in our power to make sure it's still available for you, which is really disappointing. I do hope that a lot of men especially understand now, but I think the flip side is it also has to be, let's address deadbeat fathers and the fact that very few states actually enforce child support laws and doing anything about it. Like there's a lot where men have been let off the hook from responsibility when it comes to that, and I would hope that that would change. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, I guess I totally agree with that, actually. And this is, I think, one of my main quibbles with the pro-life movement's explicit focus on just banning abortion. Because, yes, in some ways, like not having abortion like immediately on the menu will make some people sort of more careful, and maybe it will have that impact in the long term. But I think it's a little naive to say that, like, well, men will just change their behavior, because our society is still sort of shaped around this conception of getting what you want, about like who controls the relationship, and also sex is powerful and people have it in all sorts of circumstances, whether they can get abortions or not. And to actually, I think, sort of change both male and female behavior, we need a societal shift, not just the banning of abortion access for, let's be frank, the, people who can only afford to get abortions from Planned Parenthood. Other people will always have access to abortion. But yeah, actually ask men to be responsible as people, set up social expectations and perhaps policy expectations that push people towards, yes, perhaps family formation, perhaps just paying child support, perhaps just like the expectation that fathers would have to be involved in the lives of their children, to actually make people think about what pregnancy means and what impact that has on their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if y'all remember when people were saying, stop sleeping with pro-life men, and that was part of their campaign after, because it is a procreative act, and I especially feel like as feminists, as women of 2023, like we know darn good and well how a human being is made and how to prevent that, and the fact that it might not always be foolproof. Like, you know too much to play dumb at that point, but there also needs to be this expectation on males that I don't see us having, where men being deadbeats or just taking off is kind of, oh yeah, he's one of those, sorry, well, you know, the onus of it is still put on women's shoulders.
Right, and I don't know that I would say that, okay, abortion is ended, so more men just have vasectomies so they can continue having casual sex with women is like the solution that we're looking for here. Like, I don't actually think that's a great result either, which means that there is something missing here that we still need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, I just think the whole system has been rigged to let men off the hook and to continue to think of reproduction, of having children as women's thing. Like, that's just what you all do. Your body does that, and you can prevent it, and then you can, like, be involved in abortion if you can go find one, and that's just, like, your thing. Instead of just inviting them in, like, yeah, you know, this takes two to tango here. Like, this is both of our thing, and that's just never, like, feminism has never done that, except it, you know, the first wave tried to, right? But that's, I mean, it seems to me to be the obvious thing, and the hope is that you see among younger and younger generations of men, of course, older generations of men too wanted to be involved in their children's lives, but now it's like this active engagement, right, of really wanting to be part of what goes on and sort of the domestic sphere entirely, and I think that's very, very hopeful. Certainly all the men I know are like that. I mean, I could just give example after example of really, really engaged fathers, and to me that's really the hope. And so you like, let's get those men out so that the other men can see what it's like to be a fully engaged dad, you know, and how beneficial it is in the lives of those men and their children.
Well, and I think that's important, maybe having the example, because if you grew up without a father in the home or communities that are over-policed or things like that, like, there are spaces where if you've never seen a man in that role, then you're going to have that insecurity that you know what, and we see this a lot actually when it comes to abortion, women who have the mentality that the merciful thing to do is to abort because I'm so worthless, I wouldn't be a good mother. And so when we talk about the human dignity of the unborn child, sometimes it begins with seeing the human dignity in the person in front of you and saying, you are strong enough, you can absolutely do this. And I think men maybe the focus isn't as much on them, but calling them to step up and you're gonna be a great dad. You know, that's what they say when a woman tells you she's pregnant, that the first thing out of your mouth should be congratulations. Because so often they're not gonna hear that. It's, oh, I'm so sorry, are you scared, you know, all that. And maybe the same is true for men. When they, you know, my girlfriend's pregnant or whatever, congratulations, you're going to be an amazing father. Like, we're excited to watch you on this journey, because I think so many of us have been so broken down, so isolated, and just feeling like we're not enough. And when you feel that way, then parenting becomes scary, and creating now this cycle of not being around. And that's a really hard one to break. Are there any other?
Lots of questions.
There's too many good questions. Hold on, I'll move to right here in the middle. I'll make it this way too.
Thank you so much for your comment. I tend to think that some of the culture change that you're talking about can also be aided through pro-family policy. Not just because they allocate responsibilities more fairly, but also because they elevate that for human life and about relationship and responsibility. So I'd love to hear what are your top 3 pro-family policies, and what are some of the ways that people can accomplish those.
Okay, so the question was, what are the top 3 pro-family policies? And this one has Erika's name written all over it, I feel like, but Christine can also do it.
Yeah, so the final chapter of my book is all about this. I mean, I guess the final sections of the final chapter of the book. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to reiterate, there's like 100 questions, so I won't go on the big way I would. But okay, top 3. So I am very in favor of making sure that parents are not disproportionately burdened economically by the work they do as parents. So I have great colleagues who are the policy wonks who will then figure out what the best solution is. Like, I tend to want the Romney 2.0 plan. I liked Romney's 1.0 plan too. But there'll be people who will push back about, you know, different things on that. I really like AUL's push to see birth free. AUL, Americans United for Life, just came out with making birth free. I don't know that free works, but I think there's people, it's a great debate to open and to get moving on really, really lowering the costs of anything having to do with maternity, which, I mean, just it's astronomical costs. And so, you know, you can't afford to have your child, you're gonna be like in debt, you know, evicted from your apartment. Well, like, what are you gonna do, right? That's economic coercion. So I also, I like, you know, family leave and things like that, obviously. But I also really like the idea of women or men who are home with children for some point of time having no income tax for the rest of their life, because they've already kind of done their service for the common good and the civilization. So, you know, anyway, there's a lot of other ideas in the book, but yeah, and a lot of sort of principles by which I sort of think through these things.
That last one is bold. I like that. For me, my top three, similar to yours. I mean, the first one, and again, policy specifics for policy wonks. I won't get into them here, but yeah, give parents money. Babies are expensive. Children are expensive, and they are also a gift to our society, to continue our society. Like, we should be helping parents have them, not just saying that this is a private burden that they chose and they need to like go deal with it because none of us are going to help. So give parents money. I actually think that parental leave is really important, and not just maternal leave, but actually parental leave for both women and men, that both women and men have to take. Because when it's just maternity leave, that again furthers the idea that like, well, babies are like a woman's problem, and also if you hire women, they're unreliable, they're gonna like go take leave, and so that sucks. It makes having a baby seem punitive. But when men are given the opportunity also to stay home, to draw closer to their family, to actually take part in child rearing, and mothers do that as well, that solidifies like having a child is a thing that everyone is a part of, that this is an expectation that, you know, people will probably take advantage of during their careers, and this is normal and in fact good. So like normalizing childcare basically as something positive, not a disability that women have. And then, I mean, I guess this is sort of in the vein of giving parents money, but a little bit aside, is making birth free is great. Free or government subsidized childcare, especially for younger children. And that could mean subsidizing parents who stay at home, or having like good preschool that is, you know, publicly provided and serviced. Because again, one of the reasons why people don't have children and why parenthood is viewed as a burden that people are pushed to escape is because it's expensive, and then parents have to leave the workforce or leave whatever to take care of their child, and that's seen as a downside. We should be helping parents. We should be helping them further their children's lives.
Yeah, that's healthcare, childcare, transportation, and housing. Top 4 reasons that most women are going to consider abortion. And so I completely agree. The more that we focus on the systemic issues, because I think for a lot of women, when you are desperate and that second line shows up, you don't care what Ted Cruz thinks about abortion. Like, you don't. You're going to find a way to terminate if you're in that fear and panic zone, and it is usually coming down to transportation, childcare, healthcare, and housing. And the more we can actually address those needs and make abortion completely unnecessary, I think nobody wants to do that, but you should. Yes. Oh, it can be you. It was a very vague point. Y'all can fight over it. I don't know.
This is great, and so happy to be here. I read Erika's book, and I'm halfway through yours. Christine, I had trouble locating it right now, long drive down here. It's halfway through, but and from different generational perspectives, as hard as that may be for us to realize. So I'm 56 and I'm 22, and my question to the panel at large, two of you who have sons, is how do you think feminists of all generations should somehow modify their language to recognize that this generation of young men, I would say 25 and under, is really beleaguered, and I think are being blamed for the sins of a culture that they have nothing to do with. And I say that because for about 10 years now, I watched the male college students in my classroom sit in the back, they do slouch, they pull their baseball heads down really hard, and they don't talk, especially if you're in a women's studies class or any class that has anything to do with women. And having a son myself, I see the points of pushback with me. And like one time he went to an all-boys Jesuit school and he came home once and he said, "I'm a Meninist." And I said, "That's a great term." And I think he was surprised because he wanted me to have a fight with him about him being a Meninist. Because I said, "That's a great term. You need your group. You need your men, you know." But I'll never forget two things that were a marker for him. And, you know, if you're feminist, the first one was political. So the first was when he was 12, he was getting Snapchats from girls that were just completely inappropriate, you know. And I mean, hey, you know, I was raised with Madonna and not the one that's been around forever. So I mean, I pretty much seen it all, but 12 was pretty young for me to think that he would be getting these kinds of sexualized images from his girlfriend, friends who are girls, right? And then the second one, I was driving a group of them home from a Jesuit program at Boston College called Ever to Excel, and they had done Agape Latte. And my son said, "Mom, do you know about the word agape?" And I said, I do know about that word. And he said, "I never knew that there was more than one kind of love. Like, I just thought it was sex, like Europe." And my heart broke in like 1,000 little pieces because one, I realized I was doing a pretty terrible job of parenting if I hadn't helped him understand that, as Erika lovingly wonderfully brought up at the beginning of this very talk, that we have to push back right before it even starts, right? You have to shape their ideas of sex before they even get out there in the culture to learn from. And I hadn't really done that. But they were, the 5 boys in this minivan could not believe that there were loves and ways to show affection that were not sex. And it helped them explain their love for one another, you know, filial love. It helped them explain parental love, that, you know, my mom and dad were kissing, whether they've been married for 30 years or not. You know, but when they realized that there's actually a term, and again, and I think one of the things we underutilize is the classics, right? And I'm curious, like, how we help these young men realize that the culture they live in is not their fault. And then 2, how do we, you know, building on that idea that these are values, as you said, you know, Christine, these are values that are eternal. When we attach them to the religious, everybody pushes back, you know.
I think sometimes you just have to make that space because, like you're saying, when the response to men being just so cut down is, well, and I'm glad he said Meninist, because that, at least he didn't go full men's rights activist, because that's what I see. The response usually is, let me find something equally as toxic and extreme on the other side. And as somebody who runs a pro-life feminist organization, I know about the fact that sometimes you have to create a new space, a totally new avenue, and there are so many people who have that shared desire for those male spaces that are affirming and not toxic, and they're compassionate, and those type of spaces really need to be readily available, and maybe in our communities, like, we have to create them, because if you don't, they're going to find the unhealthy ones. They're going to be the trolls that come to my freaking page all the time and ask to speak to the man in charge, because that's evidently what some 4chan group wants them to do, and they just bother me a lot, and I don't want your son doing that, okay? So we need to create healthy environments beyond 4chan, I think, for males, and what that looks like you said, the leaders, you know, the looking for the people who they're going to become. Maybe not everybody has access to that, but how do we start elevating those voices over the Andrew Tates of the world? You know, I think we have to.
Yeah, I will say that I am not raising any boys. I, in fact, don't have any children. But I'm actually working on a piece about this right now. So I've been thinking about this question a lot. And there are kind of 2 elements that I see here. One is that it does in some ways feel like there's this pushback against the patriarchy, and against sort of male supremacy and also many bad things that men have done in the past. And actually Richard Reeves' book is very good on this. But I do think that a lot of young men it doesn't ring true to them to be like, you're part of the patriarchy, when they like see special programs for girls, and like girls are like totally outdoing them in school and going to college at like way greater rates than men are right now. And so it rings as false, and then they're annoyed by that. And then sort of the constant use of phrases like, you know, toxic masculinity and like all men are trash. Like, not all men are trash, in fact. Like, there are forms of masculinity that can be good, in fact. but sort of, I think a lot of young men feel demonized, even if that is not actually what the feminist movement set out to do. So there's sort of like being aware of kind of the default language that we use, and sort of our default tendencies in talking about gender relations. I think that one of the things that the feminist movement could do better, that progressives and the left could do better especially, but really all of us, is creating a positive vision of masculinity. We've spent a lot of time, I think, talking about like all the things that men do poorly and how like various male traits, maybe like aggression, are bad and bad for society. But people aren't attracted to being told that they're bad and that their traits are bad. Like, that doesn't win people over. So I think what we really need to do is actually put forward, okay, like men, not all men, but maybe it is factually true that men are different than women, that masculinity is a thing, but like, what are the good things about masculinity that we can encourage? What do we want to develop men towards? Like, what are the positive models that we should be setting for? So not just telling men, don't do that, but like, actually do this. It's great. We love that. And I think we haven't gotten there yet as a society. We're still kind of on the pendulum swing of bad. We haven't created that good ideal yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and actually aggression is really good. I mean,
Yeah, in some
if it's directed in the
circumstances,
right
it can
way,
be
like, you know, saving people out of burning buildings, really good, or whatever it is, you know, and I guess that's not really aggression, it's self-sacrifice. But, I mean, I would definitely say Richard Reeves is really, really good on this, and to go kind of find that book. But I would say one of the things I would sort of, not correct, because I think, but just in the sense of, I think it's men who have to create places for men. And not for me to tell, you know, I think men need, and this is one of the points he makes, which is, you know, from Margaret Mead, but it's just like men, you know, there were always rites of passages for men to bring boys into becoming men, because there is, and even raising boys. I haven't put my finger on it yet, and I'm gonna write about it when I do, but I can't really figure out what happens that a girl side of has this much, I don't know, there's just like an easier transition to womanhood somehow, but I'm still trying to figure out how my boys are going to become like the amazing man like my husband. And I'm just like watching it like, how does this work, you know? Because there is like, you know, and so I'm constantly saying to my sons who have like energy and are like, there's 3 of them in a row and like destroying each other, and it's amazing to watch, but it's like, direct that stuff to the good, you know? I mean, it's good stuff in there that is amazing, and you can be a hero in so many different realms in life, but it's just, you can't be a predator, right? So I think it's just, I think it's like encouraging male-only spaces, you know, and that needs to be allowed. And this is someone who like very much is an anti-discrimination law person. So private spaces in which men can be men and women are not, you know, permitted, basically, is a really important thing for boys and for men to, you know, to teach boys how to be men. So that's my.
So in conclusion, Richard Reeves had like a real good, he was our 4th panelist.
He's the 3rd member of the
panel.
panel.
He's had a real good night. He came full circle. Do you guys like go buy his book?
Tell him to stop supporting sex work, though.
Yeah, but
pornotherapy.
not till he stops.
Otherwise,
go
yeah.
pirate his book. Go steal it from someone. Don't do that. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock, and I think we're done, right? Are we done, Anton? When are they kicking us out of here?
Oh.
We have to pull another hour? Okay, I think that a better thing would be for us to kind of maybe do 2 more questions, and then a lot of people have questions, probably directed for specific people, and so then we could kind of mingle and hang out for a minute. I'm going to get you at the back because you're standing up, and I feel bad for you for having to stand up.
So you mentioned this notion of sugar daddy, sugar whatever, but I found that that's really interesting because I've seen it in the females talking to other females that have plenty of money on their own. Like most of my friends that ride with me are in courses, and I asked them questions that turned out to be like, when you was talking about this guy that goes, you know, I buy you a whole pillow string and dating, and I was thinking, no, but what I is, you know, would you ever do something like that? And she's like, was there a farm included? I can buy it. financial, planning firm, and they have tons of money. And so for me, that was interesting. In terms of thinking about like the lower income people doing it for security for people who have money. And this whole notion is like blowing my mind. People, it's not necessarily for money. Sometimes it's just for comfort, and sometimes it's other things. And then I saw an Instagram post where this woman said, I married a man for money so that my kids can marry for love. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I would have never thought of that.
Wait, so did this guy said he would buy her a polo string? Like a string of polo ponies? Yeah. Wow, I love horses.
Don't do it.
Send him our way.
Well, I mean...
Not corrupt Christine tonight.
But, I mean, this goes back to exactly what you were saying, Destiny, though, that it's about power, right? Like, when you think about what money signifies, if you don't have any money, then like having some money like just helps you be more effectual in the world we live in. If you already have money, having more money makes you even more powerful. So if that's a trade you can make, like, seems reasonable, or it could seem reasonable that you would. Like, especially in the United States, I don't know, it does feel like everyone is kind of always trying to trade up in some sense and become more powerful. And this is how we measure efficacy in the world. Even if you're rich, you could always be richer. So
But in so
I
many
see the
ways-
attraction there, or what could be attractive there.
This was how marriage used to be, right? At a time when women this was families coming together to build equity and power and stuff. And we look back on that and we're like, that's so non-romantic. That's so gross how we used to do that. We're so much better now. Anyway, where are my ponies? Like that type of, I don't know. It's very interesting how judgmental we always were, that it wasn't about relationships and intimacy. And yet here we are again, not learning from that.
Yeah, and the statement that I would marry for money so that my child could marry for love is like kind of a weird one, because how would your child learn what love looks like? Like where are they going to figure that out?
I didn't. I'm right here.
Well, but I think this is also an
We have to dig it
interesting
for.
social convention that we have that also shapes the way that people approach sex and marriage, where, you know, we think of marriage and childbearing as sort of like this capstone event that you only do when everything else is in place, when you're economically secure enough, when you have like all of these other things in line. And we need to actually, I think, begin to push back on that too, to be able to say to people that like love is accessible. Like you don't have to wait until your 401k is like fully funded to have a relationship. Yeah. Right, yeah.
You don't have to have any ponies. Okay, Margot, we're going to do you as the last question. We're ready.
I'm kind of interested. So you talked a lot about like the influence of culture and I think social media, and for some individual responses of avoid the pornography, but we know that social media is designed to be addictive because it's financially beneficial. So there's this system that's promoting addiction that's based on economics. And I'm wondering if you have some thoughts or suggestions about how we can change the economics of the social media empires to promote some more positive understandings of who we are as human beings.
I would send you to my colleagues at EPPC who work on taking down the tech giants. Yeah, I don't have anything to say myself, though.
I mean, I think actually one piece of advice that I would give to, I guess, parents, but also kids is try to keep your kids off of social media for as long as humanly possible. Like, try to not give them a smartphone or an iPhone until like as late as you possibly can. Because honestly, the people who invented the iPhone, the people who run these social media companies realize this, and they don't let their kids use the products that they've created. And we should be aware of that. And like the way to make social media less lucrative is to not be on it and to not let ourselves spend all this time on it. I say this as a person who is absolutely and painfully addicted to Twitter, and I need help. Don't be like me. Like there is a choice. And I think from a policy perspective, I think our government could do more to actually try and regulate social media. I mean, we're seeing the harms. There's research on how it makes young women, especially, like, more depressed, more suicidal ideation. Like, we see the harms that are caused. So there should be grounds to begin to regulate or push back against this. The question is, who is funded by these companies and who will be brave enough to do so?
I feel like this is our Dorkin moment where she's like, oh, women stop having sex, and we're going to be like, oh, people stop using social media. But we're going to be way more successful than she was, for sure. We're definitely getting everyone to stop using social media. I think it is incredibly hard because it's changing the brain chemistry of children. And I know I did not let my children have phones until they were in school and they got made fun of and all that type of stuff. But here's the problem. It was other kids who were showing them rape porn on their phones at school and at birthday parties. And it's like, I mean, so the solution is you live in a cave, and if any of you want to go in on a cave with me, it's going to be a cave commune. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have a picture of Andrea Dworkin spray painted on the side of the cave. It's going to be real punk rock. I appreciate you guys coming. I have to bring Leah up to do closing remarks, but this has been fun, and we'll all kind of hang around a little bit and talk to you more if you're not sick of us.
Thank you. All right, I am doing your closing remarks. I'm Leah Jacobson. I'm the CEO and the founder of Guiding Star Project, and we're the third sponsor for the evening, along with Feminists Choosing Life of New York and the Christian Legal Society. Guiding Star, this conversation tonight, you guys, every piece of it, I was like, yes, 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 this is so wonderful. The work that we do is to really help, I think, change some of those core beliefs about who we are as women, because we really feel strongly that women's health care is where we start to change these views of ourselves as women. So this was part one of a two-part series called Reframing Agency. Tonight's conversation was rights and responsibilities in contemporary sex culture, which I think was fabulous. You both absolutely, so good. Yeah, we're gonna give you another round of applause. It was so good. Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a safe night and have a wonderful march tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.